But Sauron was not of mortal flesh, and though he was robed now of that shape in which he had wrought so great an evil, so that he could never again appear fair to the eyes of men, yet his spirit arose out of the deep, and passed as a shadow and a black wind over the sea, and came back to Middle-earth and to Mordor that was his home. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we're going to be taking a look at some things that I've talked about before, but not in too much depth. Sauron's multiple deaths and how they impacted his power, particularly his shapeshifting power. Related articles and videos are in the description and cards for more info. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. We'll jump right into it. Of course, Sauron was one of the main antagonists throughout all of Tolkien's works, and the main villain in a few particular ages. Yet before then, he was still the main lieutenant of Morgoth or Melkor. Yet during all of those times, he actually narrowly avoided death and capture. Whether it was fleeing the wrath of the Valar during the Years of the Trees and hiding in Angband, while Melkor himself was taken hostage, or when he shapeshifted into a werewolf to fight Huan and Luthien and he lost, nearly having his throat crushed by the jaws of Huan. Yet there was mercy, and Sauron escaped as a vampire using that shapeshifting ability. Even in the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age, Sauron surrendered and was offered a chance at seeing justice for the deeds that he had done, which he also fled. Yet in that moment, he had become the main antagonist of the Free Peoples, who would eventually see him defeated later on as well. Managing to avoid death despite losing the War of the Elves in Sauron, Sauron saw to the corruption and downfall of Numenor, many years later. After the Númenóreans sent their armada to Valinor, Eru brought about the downfall, and as great waves and thunder overtook the island, Sauron was drowned in the Temple of Melkor or near it. He died, yet his spirit disembodied, returned to Mordor, and the next year, in 3320 of the Second Age, he took up his mantle as Dark Lord in the Darkland once again. Now, it says that he also took up his One Ring. One great point of contention in the lore is, did Sauron leave his ring behind in Mordor when he was captured by the Númenóreans, or did he bring it to Numenor? Only for his spirit to bring it back to Mordor with him during and after the downfall. I can see either explanation happening, though there are some implications with the second concerning how his spirit and the One Ring could interact in that way that I find potentially problematic with regards to later lore. However, upon his return to Mordor, it is said that in that death, he had lost his ability to take on a fair guise, one that could trick the Free Peoples of Middle-earth. Now, I must also assume he lost the ability to take on other forms, such as like the vampire and the werewolf as well, being really stuck now between a dark, evil spirit and his more physical, true form and manifestation. Now, this could be from a general depowering from that first death where he was drowned, or something that Eru took from him, or it may have been something else. However, his defeat here was somehow correlated with him losing that power, and so he was weakened. Yet he came back in force rather quickly, making the War of the Last Alliance against the Free Peoples in 3429 of the Second Age. This was a very fast turnaround compared to the next age, but still it took the greatest that men and elves had to offer in Elendil and Gil-galad to beat Sauron at all. And even then he still lived until Isildur took the One Ring as a word-guild or payment for the deaths of his father and brother, and Sauron was more or less slain again. But as we know with the events of the Lord of the Rings, the One Ring allowed Sauron to endure, at least more so than he would without it. And so for over 3,000 years, Sauron rebuilt both his faction and himself, until at last the Nine-Fingered Dark Lord formed a very, very weak physical form of himself, and made war on the West with his armies during the War of the Ring, even while he sat in his Tower of Barad-dûr, far away in Mordor. But even then, as we know, the One Ring would be destroyed and Sauron would be slain in this act in Mordor once again. Yet his spirit rose up and dispersed. Either he rejoined Morgoth in the void beyond Arda once more, or he was simply a ghost and a shadow in Middle-earth, too weak to ever truly take form again and hinder the Free Peoples. Now, I've been using the term death to describe these things happening to Sauron, and while it really generally is death, can one ever truly kill one of the Ainur, one of the Valar or Maiar? This topic deserves its own video for sure. Now, no matter what, the Ainur were bound to Arda until its end, since they entered the world. Except for Morgoth in the way that he was cast out of Arda beyond the walls of night. But if one could really kill one of the Ainur, it just seems that somehow they would still be tethered to the world. Now one might say that becoming houseless, formless, except the form of the spirit, is all death is for any person in Arda. But again, the fate of men, for instance, is different than that of the fate of one of the Maiar. So Sauron died 3 times, and had come back in some meaningful and powerful way from 2 of them. Of course, this partially has to do with the One Ring. Actually, that's a great part of why he came back. And since he put a large deal of his power, malice, and will into it, much of his spirit, in fact, he could return through the ring. But it is worth noting that he was still greatly weakened each time he died. The first return from death cost him much of his illusionary capabilities, his form changing, and he had to take his evil form permanently. His second return nearly cost him his ability to come back physically at all, as it took a very, very long time to come back, and even then it's very likely that the War of the Ring Sauron, without the One Ring at least, would have lost a one-on-one fight against a hobbit, probably. Okay, maybe that's too far, but he was super, super weak and frail due to his multiple deaths. Again, as we see in the Third Age, there was a time when he was a spirit, and then there was a time where he actually did take physical form, so I'm not exactly sure if that was always something he could do, or that's just the process that you go from spirit to physical form. But either way, practically without the One Ring, Sauron would never be able to take any sort of meaningful form again after his 3rd death. So no matter what form his death and post-death spirit looked like, or where he was sent, he was gone. That is the lore regarding Sauron's multiple deaths and his shape-shifting powers. Let me know what you all think about this in the comments below, and so my friends, we come to the end of our tale. From this tale we see that evil can take many forms, and we must be virtuous and guarded enough ourselves to recognize it and oppose it when and where we can, without giving in to our own self-righteousness. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts on this little bit of lore concerning Sauron? Let me know in the comments below. I tend to like when characters have to sacrifice something for a great show of power, such as a resurrection, if resurrections are used in stories. So this is a neat thing. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider getting some candles from our friends Mythologie Candles, or order some Wet Air United Cutlery Lord of the Rings swords, statues, and other replicas from Castle Kon, who does international shipping, and use the code WEST at checkout, and please check out our merch. Join our memberships and Patreon for access to our Discord server and our monthly podcast. One is coming up later in November, probably in the last week of November. Thanks to our valor to your patrons and YouTube members for continuing to keep the channel going. Ed Patterson, Comic Nut 64, Brian Hunley, Peter Shepard, John Hume, Reese Jenkins, Arthur Merlin, Theodore, Andrew Carlisle, and Zumi. Thank you all so much. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I'll see you all again next week with a video remake of the Angmar War. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.